I'm Elle Harrison. I'm an executive coach at Wild Courage. I work with leaders and teams in transition, helping them to find clarity and new possibilities in times of disruption. I want to talk today a little bit about change and about how we change as human beings. It's something we've been interested in as humans for a long time. More than 100 years ago, Arnold van Gennep, a German ethnographer, studied different tribes and cultures from all over the world. He noticed that most or many of those tribes had ceremonies or rituals to help support people to move from one life stage to another, or one state to another. Sometimes that was about moving life stage, so moving from adolescence into adulthood, or becoming a parent, or becoming an elder. Sometimes it was about changing status in a tribe, so perhaps a ceremony to support someone to become chief of the tribe. And sometimes there were ceremonies for the whole society to move from one state to another, for example, from war to peace or famine to plenty. When he looked at all these different ceremonies, which he called rites of passage, from all over the world, he noticed that they had three common elements or three stages. The first stage he called severance, which is cutting from your old reality. So cutting from the role that you've been playing in society, and also cutting from the identities that you might be inhabiting in order to play that role, your beliefs and perspectives, and who you are being as well as what you're doing. After severance is the second stage, which he called the liminal phase or threshold time. This is a time where you're between worlds. So you've left something behind, you've stopped doing or being something, and you're in this muddly, mixed up world where you don't quite yet know who you are, what's important, where you're going, or how to find your way through to something different. And finally, the third stage after the threshold, he called Reincorporation. So bringing what you've learned from this threshold time back into your body, into the structures and systems and processes of society, taking on a new role, but more importantly, taking on new beliefs, new perspectives, new ways of seeing things, so that you can show up differently in society, or as a society so that you can show up differently in the world. What I think is really interesting about Van Gennep's model of change and his model of rites of passage is that there's this whole middle phase, this threshold time, this liminal time between worlds, which I think in the West we've slightly forgotten or become unfamiliar with. I've worked as a coach for 15 years now, and I work mostly with people in these times of deep change or transition. And I've noticed that generally we expect change to happen pretty fast. So we expect to go from one job straight into another. Or we expect to give birth, become a parent, and know what to do, know how to be this new person. And we forget that actually there's this whole window of discovering and learning how to be. And even before we're learning how to be, there's this time where we're unlearning what we thought was true. So when disruption happens, it's almost as though there's this earthquake underneath the ground of your world. And you realize that the ground we've been standing on, the ground you've built your life on, is not as solid as you thought. And that actually, in the cracks of the ground that start appearing, you can see new possibilities. And you can see that you can start to put back the pieces of your life in different ways, and that would have different potential, different outcomes. So what does this all have to do with us right now and with lockdown? Well, I think we're in a collective rite of passage together as society. We're in this threshold time and we're relearning what's important to us and how to put our lives together in ways that serve us all. Maybe a few months ago, you were happily or not so happily commuting into the office every day and dropping your kids off at the school gate for 7 blissful hours of uninterrupted work time. wining and dining with friends and clients, and just going about your normal life. And then suddenly lockdown arrived, and there's this really dramatic severance or cutting from our old ways of being, from our old life. And we're flung into this messy, muddly, confusing, overwhelming, stressful, sometimes exciting maybe, sometimes a sense of possibility that might be appearing, but a really fundamentally quite difficult experience and difficult time. And that is classic threshold time. In individual coaching journeys, that time can last months or even years, and as a whole society or as an organization, potentially even longer, that we might be unlearning and relearning. And it's not just coronavirus. If we look back through the last few years, we can see wave after wave of deep cultural change happening around us and confronting us, hitting our realities and dissolving some of the structures that we thought were permanent. So Brexit and the movement of Me Too and forest fires in the Amazon and California and Australia, and now Black Lives Matter. These really fundamental waves of change that are challenging us to take apart our realities and to look at the way we've put them together and to choose differently in how we reassemble our world and also ourselves. So how do you move in these moments of change where you're in this liminal space between the old world and you haven't yet found your way through to something new and solid that you can build your future from? Well, this is where it gets a little bit tricky. Normally, as a coach, I'd be listening really deeply for where you are as an individual or as an organization. Because there's no single map to move through change. There's no single move, and there's no model for exactly how we all need to change. But there are a couple of tools that I use regularly with clients, which I wanted to offer as a way for you to start to explore some of these questions and some of these deeper currents of change in your own life. One of the tools that I think is most useful is getting really, really clear on what are you for. Not what are you fighting against, not what drives you crazy, but behind all of that, what one single word do you want to anchor your life to right now? You don't have to get it right. There's not only one word, and it may change through your lifetime. But right now, if you look at the things that are driving you crazy, the things you're really frightened of, the things that make you sad, the things that you really love and care for, what might those things tell you about some of your values, about some of the things you're wanting to pay attention to or bring more of into your life? And so that's the tool I want to offer you, is to distill your values or what's important to you into one word, just one word for right now. And then at every crossroads, every decision, every time you're asking yourself, where do I go? What do I do now? You come back to that word, you orient around it, and you ask yourself, which way, what path, what decision is going to lead me deeper into whatever your word is. So it's not just writing your values on the wall as an organization or getting clear through a coaching session about what's important to you. It's actually about living that value, living that quality into the fabric of your life so that your whole world is a deep expression of that value and is building more of that quality into our shared world. So that's the first tool, asking yourself, what am I for? And then committing to that. The second tool that I use a lot is about asking yourself, what is the next most obvious move? So this is often quite a hard one for those of us who are more used to strategy, more used to planning and business plans and knowing where you're going. Maybe from a really young age, you knew what you wanted and you set out and you've been achieving that. And for much of your life, that works great. And then sometimes it doesn't. sometimes you come to these moments where everything you're doing and everything you've learned about how to succeed is not getting the results you want. And that's when there's this opportunity, or that's when you know really you're in this threshold and there's this opportunity to explore different ways of moving. So when you come to one of these moments where you do feel perhaps stuck or lost or overwhelmed, you pause, you center yourself, and you ask yourself, what is my next most obvious move? Sometimes that can be tied to the one word that you've been anchoring to. And sometimes if that isn't even clear at this point, then you just see, what do I do? What do I do now? And you don't worry or strategize about where that's going to take you, what outcomes it's going to have. You trust your instinct. One of my favorite stories around this is in Steve Jobs' commencement speech from, I think, 2005. And he talks about how when he was a 17-year-old, he dropped out of college because it was too expensive and he just couldn't justify it. And he was kicking around, sleeping on the floor of various friends on campus. And he noticed these posters with calligraphy on, and he found them really interesting, really intriguing. So he decided to go along to a couple of lectures about calligraphy. He didn't have any idea at that point why he was interested in that, what it was going to lead to, or what output it would create later in his life. And yet, 10 years later, when he was designing the Mac, everything he'd learned about typography and calligraphy was built into that computer with its multiple typefaces and the proportional spacing. So he followed his instinct, and he said in that speech that looking back, you can connect the dots. But when you're moving forwards, you're simply moving on instinct, on faith, on this deep connection to something unconscious or wise within you that does know how to move through uncertainty and is actually perfectly comfortable with moving in that way, even when large parts of you, your strategic mind, the parts that are used to being in charge, perhaps are not so comfortable with that way of being. So those are the two tools: asking yourself, what am I for, and committing to it. And then when you feel stuck or when you're not sure what to do, pause, center, and ask yourself, what is the next most obvious move? Take that step, pause again, center, and ask yourself, what is the next most obvious move? And sometimes those next moves can be really small and seemingly insignificant. It might just be, give Jeff a call. You don't know why you're calling Jeff. Maybe you haven't spoken to him for 3 years, but you trust it. So those are the tools I wanted to offer today. And fundamentally, I guess what I want to leave you with is trusting that in these moments of deep change, which we are in together right now, in this threshold time, in lockdown, with all these other waves of cultural change shaping our world, it is perfectly okay to not know who you are, where you're going, or how you're going to get there. In fact, I would say it's wise to not know. And if you can let yourself not know, then you can discover something bigger, something different, something that you hadn't seen before. If you wanted to share how any of this is landing for you, or even to explore how it might be showing up in your life, your business, your team, I'm on Elle at wildcourage.com. I'd love to hear from you.